So we're standing on what used to be called Herndon Avenue. It's a cross street between two busy thoroughfares in downtown Mobile. And on the night of March 21st, 1981, this street became a crime scene. Michael Donald grew up in Mobile. He was the youngest of several children of Beulah May Donald. They grew up in a local housing project. He was a graduate of Murphy High School. He was about to enroll in college to train to be a brick mason. He worked in the mailroom at the Press Register. He liked to play basketball with his friends, and in fact the morning that he died, he played basketball at a local rec center with some of his friends. And his life ended tragically and without any real provocation. He was a real victim of circumstance. He was chosen completely at random by two Klansmen who went looking for an African American to beat and murder in response to a court case. This is a case of a man named Joseph Anderson, who was an African American man who was accused of murdering a Birmingham police officer. And so this case is sent to Mobile and ends in a hung jury. They can't come to a decision. And as the news of that comes out over the airwaves, Benny Jack Hayes, the local leader of the United Klans of America, says, just in conversation with his son Henry and some of Henry's friends, that, you know, if a black man can get away with killing a white man in Mobile, it should be the other way around. And so Henry Hayes, who's, you know, really a teenager, sort of internalizes this. And a few days later, he and another Klansman who's 17 years old, named James Knowles, they go out and they make good on this. And they drive down through the black section of town and they find Michael Donald. And Michael Donald gets caught up in all this through really no fault of his own. And Donald, you know, being born in 1961, he really grows up in a city that is on the absolute verge of social revolution. Some of his older siblings probably participated in some of the movement activities in the late 60s and early 70s. But it's Michael, the 19-year-old youngest son of the Donald family, that regrettably gets caught up in all of this in March of 1981. The Klan didn't have a large presence in Mobile, but it had a consistent presence in Mobile, much like it did in many southern communities. There had been cross burnings and other incidents with some regularity since about 1949. This particular group, the United Klans of America, was based out of Tuscaloosa. This is Robert Shelton's Klan group. This is the group that's responsible for the bombing of the 16th Street Baptist Church in Birmingham, whose members are responsible for the murder of Viola Luizzo during the Selma to Montgomery March. It was a small group down here, but you know, they were very active. We know from the testimonies during court that they had regular and well-attended meetings. They likely saw the Joseph Anderson case as another crack in that picture window that was their perfect society. And in March of 1981, they respond to these changes by really resurrecting an ancient form of racial terrorism, lynching. The local police force was very reticent to call this a race-related incident. They in fact arrested three reputed drug dealers who lived a bit further down here on Herndon Avenue and charged them with the crime, and they tried to link Donald to them in some way, but all of this really falls through. About 6 months after Michael Donald is killed, Mobile gets a new U.S. District Attorney, a local lawyer, African-American lawyer named Thomas Figures. Figures' brother Michael is a civil rights activist and a state politician, and the two of them, the Figures brothers, really urge the FBI to get involved. There's a large FBI field office here in Mobile. And so for about 18 months, the FBI conducts its own investigation. And in the spring of 1983, about 2 years after Donald is killed, they make their arrest. They arrest Henry Hayes and they arrest James Knowles. Knowles actually signs a plea deal. He agrees to be charged for a lesser crime of violating Donald's civil rights, which of course comes with a mandatory 25-year sentence. And so he testifies on behalf of the prosecution. Henry Hayes is convicted of first-degree murder and is sentenced to death, and he's executed in 1996. He's the first white person in Alabama executed for murdering an African American in almost 6 decades, and so it's a significant case. During the trial of Henry Hayes, Morris Dees and some of his associates from the Southern Poverty Law Center in Montgomery, they come to Mobile and they observe the proceedings and they talk with Beulah May Donald and they talk with her attorney, who's Michael Figures, and they convince her to file a wrongful death suit, a civil suit on behalf of her son Michael, suing the United Klans of America, suing the collective organization for the actions of its members. This is something that's new in prosecuting what we today call hate crimes. This is something that you typically see in corporate law. But Dees had this idea that he could prove agency, that he could prove that these two Klansmen had acted on orders or had acted because of the climate that the broader organization in Tuscaloosa had created. And so they filed this lawsuit that's Beulah May Donald versus United Klans of America about 3 years after the murder. And in 1987, they finally get their day in court. And it's an incredibly dramatic scene, and it's one, I think, of the most compelling court cases that comes from modern Mobile. Dees is able to tie directly, using James Knowles as a witness and using some of the other Klansmen, tie directly the attitudes that manifested themselves on the street in March of '81 with the literature, with the written documents, and with the language that was coming from the United Klans headquarters in Tuscaloosa. And so he very dramatically can emphasize this by a caricature that's printed in the magazine of the United Klans of America. And it basically says, it's a shame how blacks are being treated today. They should all, we should all work to make sure that they get what they deserve. And then as you turn the page, there's a caricature of a lynching victim. And what Dees was able to do was to show that cartoon next to the coroner's photograph of Donald. And it was incredibly effective and I think really helped to prove that point that all of this existed in some agency. But there was another element to that trial which I think is even more remarkable, and it gets back to Beulah May Donald herself. Beulah May apparently did not go to the first trial, the trial of Henry Hayes, but she went to the civil trial. And near the end of James Knowles' testimony on the stand, he turns to Beulah May Donald and he begins to cry, and he tells her how sorry he is, how sorry that all of this happened, that her family was inexplicably caught up in this terrible, terrible tragedy. And Beulah May Donald actually says to him, "I've already forgiven you," which I just think is incredible. The jury, within 30 minutes, comes back and awards the Beulah May Donald family $7 million in judgment. Now, of course, the United Klans of America doesn't have $7 million. What they do have is a building in Tuscaloosa, their headquarters. And so Beulah May Donald gets the keys to the headquarters of the Klan whose members were responsible for bombing the 16th Street Baptist Church, whose members were responsible for the murder of Viola Luizzo. She sells the building, and using the proceeds from that, she buys the first home that she ever had. And she lives out the rest of her life, which regrettably is a short one. She dies about 18 months later. A fascinating end to the suit itself. The New York Times hailed her as the woman that beat the Klan. and she's, you know, must have been a fascinating and very strong woman. It's a sad story in Mobile's long history, and it's a good question. You know, why would we focus on something like this? But I think the answer really comes from something more elemental, and it's in this fact that we learn the lessons of history. Maya Angelou said that, you know, history, despite its often retching pain, you know, it can't be undone, it can't be unlived. But if we learn the lessons of that history, then it need not be repeated. And I think that's the real story of what happens to Michael Donald.